They called him the quiet kid who drew weird things, but when his sketch landed on Time magazine's cover, everyone who had laughed suddenly forgot how to breathe. What happened next would shake the very foundations of Roosevelt High. 15-year-old Jaden Williams sat in his usual corner of the school library, the worn vinyl chair creaking softly under his slight frame. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the chipped formica table where his sketchbook lay open. His fingers moved with precision across the page, creating intricate lines that would birth fantastic cityscapes filled with impossible architecture and soaring bridges that defied gravity. The smell of old books and industrial disinfectant filled his nostrils as he worked, the familiar scents somehow comforting in their consistency. Around him, the daily symphony of teenage life played out in whispers and shuffling feet. Students passed his table like he was furniture, their eyes sliding over him without pause. Occasionally, someone would glance at his dark skin, at the way he avoided eye contact, at how his lips never seemed to form words during group discussions. They saw what they expected to see, a black kid who didn't talk, didn't engage, didn't matter. The weight of their indifference pressed against his shoulders like a heavy coat he couldn't remove. Ms. Haywood, the librarian, had long ago stopped trying to engage him in conversation. Her interactions had dwindled to perfunctory nods and the occasional reminder about library closing times. When parents complained about those kids taking up space, her eyes would linger on Jaden a moment too long, as if calculating whether he belonged among the college-bound students who filled the library's honor roll displays. The November air outside was crisp, but inside the library, the heating system made everything feel stale and overwarmed. Jaden's hand moved steadily across the paper, building layers of detail into a sprawling metropolis that existed only in his imagination. Spires twisted toward an alien sky, populated by bridges that curved like ribbons, and buildings that seemed to breathe with organic life. In his mind, he could walk those streets, feel the cool metal of the handrails, hear the whisper of wind through the geometric gardens he sketched between towering structures. Well, what do we have here? The voice cut through his concentration like a blade. Lucas Martinez stood beside his table, flanked by two other seniors whose names Jaden had never bothered to learn. Lucas was everything Jaden wasn't. Tall, loud, effortlessly popular, the kind of kid teachers remembered and college recruiters noticed. His Letterman jacket bore patches from 3 different sports, and his smile could charm adults while hiding the cruelty that teenagers recognized instinctively. Before Jaden could react, Lucas snatched the sketchbook from his hands. The sudden movement sent Jaden's pencils scattering across the table, the sound sharp in the library's quiet atmosphere. "Oh man, look at this!" Lucas held the book high, angling it so his friends could see. "We got ourselves a regular Picasso over here. Hey guys, check out these food stamp fantasies." The laughter that erupted was like glass breaking. Other students looked up from their studying, some giggling, others turning away with the practiced indifference of witnesses who didn't want to get involved. The fluorescent light seemed to pulse with each wave of mockery, and Jaden felt heat rise up his neck, staining his cheeks with embarrassment. Seriously, what is this supposed to be? Lucas squinted at the drawing with exaggerated confusion. Some kind of alien welfare housing? Your mom's dreams for the projects? The racist edge to the joke wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. A few students shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. "Me bars?" Haywood glanced over from her desk, but made no move to intervene, her expression suggesting this was just boys being boys, nothing that required adult interference. Jaden reached for his book, but Lucas held it higher, just out of reach. "Aw, come on, don't be so sensitive. We're just appreciating your art." He said the last word like it tasted bitter. With deliberate slowness, Lucas began tearing pages from the sketchbook. The sound of paper ripping was obscene in the library's hush. Months of work, hundreds of hours of careful detail, fell to the floor in crumpled pieces. Each torn page was a small death, a piece of Jaden's inner world destroyed for the entertainment of teenagers who couldn't see past their own reflections. "There," Lucas said, dropping the mangled remains of the sketchbook onto the table. "Maybe now you'll focus on real subjects, like getting a job that doesn't involve asking if people want fries with that." The group walked away laughing, their voices echoing off the library's high ceilings. Jaden sat frozen, staring at the torn paper scattered around his feet like fallen leaves. The heating system's steady hum seemed louder now, almost mocking in its persistence. He could feel eyes on him, some pitying, some embarrassed, some already moving on to more interesting drama. Mrs. Haywood approached his table with the slow, measured steps of someone performing an unpleasant duty. "Jaden," she said, her voice carrying the tone adults used when they wanted to sound understanding without actually understanding anything. "You need to be less sensitive about these things. Boys will be boys, and you can't let every little comment get under your skin." She began picking up the torn pages, her movements brisk and efficient. "Maybe you should focus more on your regular schoolwork instead of these drawings. College applications don't care about fantasy pictures." Jaden watched her dispose of his work in the wastebasket beside her desk. Months of effort reduced to trash in 30 seconds. He gathered his remaining pencils with hands that trembled slightly, the muscle memory of creation now associated with destruction. The familiar weight of the pencils felt foreign in his palm, like tools he'd forgotten how to use. That night, he didn't draw. The pattern established itself quickly over the following days. Jaden's locker bore the word FREAK in black marker, the letters thick and aggressive against the metal surface. In biology class, Mr. Patterson publicly referred to him as dysfunctional when Jaden took a moment too long to process a question about cellular mitosis. The laughter from his classmates was becoming a soundtrack to his existence. Someone had filmed the library incident and posted it to TikTok with the caption, "Future unemployment draws instead of talking." The video had gained modest traction, enough for classmates to recognize him in the hallways and mimic his silent concentration with exaggerated facial expressions. They'd purse their lips and furrow their brows, pretending to sketch in the air while making weird faces that were supposed to represent autism. Jaden stopped bringing any art supplies to school. The empty space in his backpack where his sketchbook used to rest felt like a missing organ. At home, he'd sit at his desk with paper in front of him, pencil in hand, but the images that had once flowed so freely now felt trapped behind a wall of shame and doubt. What was the point? Who would see it? Who would care? His mother noticed the change but didn't know how to address it. "You haven't been drawing lately," she observed one evening, glancing at his unused art supplies gathering dust on his dresser. Jaden shrugged, unable to explain how ridicule had poisoned something that had once been pure joy. A month later, Roosevelt High's annual art exhibition was in full swing in the school's main hallway. Parents, students, and community members wandered past displays of watercolor landscapes and charcoal portraits, the kind of safe, representational work that filled high school art shows across America. The conversations were polite and predictable. Proud parents praising their children's efforts, teachers offering encouragement, students pointing out technical achievements to friends. Elena Rodriguez had only come to support her nephew Marcus, whose ceramic bowl was displayed among the pottery section. As the art curator for Time magazine's culture section, she attended these community events out of family obligation rather than professional interest. She'd seen thousands of student art exhibitions over her 15-year career, and they rarely surprised her anymore. Walking past the usual array of still lifes and self-portraits, something caught her eye. A single sheet of paper tacked to the wall near the emergency exit, almost hidden behind a larger canvas painting of a sunset. The paper was wrinkled and slightly torn, clearly rescued from somewhere rather than carefully preserved. But the image on it made her stop mid-step. It was a cityscape unlike anything she'd ever seen. Buildings that seemed to breathe, bridges that defied physics, spires that twisted toward the sky like frozen tornadoes. The level of detail was extraordinary, but more than that, it had vision. Real vision. The kind of imaginative power that couldn't be taught in art classes or workshops. This was the work of someone who saw the world differently, who understood space and form in ways that most artists never achieved. "Excuse me," she approached Mrs. Haywood, who was hovering near the display tables. "This drawing by the exit, who's the artist?" Mrs. Haywood followed her gaze and frowned slightly. "Oh, that's not really part of the exhibition. One of our custodians found it in the trash and thought it was too detailed to throw away. The student who drew it doesn't really participate in school activities." "What's his name?" "Jaden Williams. He has some challenges. Autism spectrum, doesn't really communicate well. Sweet kid, but not exactly college material, if you know what I mean." Elena studied the drawing more carefully. The line work was confident and precise, the perspective sophisticated. Whoever had created this understood architectural principles intuitively, had a grasp of proportion and scale that most art students took years to develop. The imaginative elements weren't random fantasy. They followed their own internal logic, suggesting a coherent world with its own physics and aesthetics. "I'd like to meet him," Elena said. Mrs. Haywood looked surprised. "Jaden? I mean, he probably won't talk to you. He doesn't really engage with people. Could you arrange an introduction?" The next day, Jaden sat in the guidance counselor's office, confused and slightly panicked. Mrs. Chen had called him out of chemistry class with no explanation, and now there was a woman in an expensive-looking blazer sitting across from him, studying his face with an intensity that made him want to disappear into his chair. "Jaden," Mrs. Chen said gently, "this is Ms. Rodriguez from Time magazine. She saw your drawing at the art exhibition and wanted to meet you." Jaden's eyes widened. Time magazine? The magazine with covers he'd studied in doctor's offices and grocery store checkout lines. The woman across from him looked professional and important, the kind of person who belonged in boardrooms and galleries, not in Roosevelt High's cramped guidance office with its motivational posters and college brochures. "Your drawing," Elena said, her voice warm but direct. "The cityscape that was displayed. Did you create that?" Jaden nodded, his throat suddenly dry. He hadn't spoken in a professional context since middle school, when teachers still tried to coax words out of him during presentations. "It's extraordinary work. Really exceptional. How long have you been drawing?" "Since I was little," Jaden managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom gave me sketchbooks when talking was hard." Elena leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell me about the city in your drawing? The buildings, the bridges? Do they exist somewhere, or did you imagine them?" For the first time in weeks, Jaden felt a familiar spark. "I imagine them. They're places where things work differently, where the buildings can think and the bridges know where people need to go, where everything fits together even if it looks impossible." "Do you have more drawings like that one?" Jaden hesitated. "At home. I don't bring them to school anymore." "Why not?" The question hung in the air. How could he explain the humiliation, the torn papers, the laughter that still echoed in his ears? How could he make this successful woman understand what it felt like to have your dreams mocked by teenagers who saw your silence as weakness? "People here don't understand them," he said finally. "They think they're weird." Elena was quiet for a moment, processing not just his words but the weight behind them. She'd worked in creative industries long enough to recognize the particular kind of damage that happened when talent was dismissed, when vision was ridiculed by people too limited to see beyond their own expectations. "Jaden, I'd like to see more of your work. Would you be willing to show me some of your other drawings?" That afternoon, Elena sat in the Williams family's modest living room, surrounded by sketchbooks that contained worlds. Jaden had been hesitant at first, but as she responded to each drawing with genuine appreciation and intelligent questions, he began to open up. His mother, Sandra, watched from the kitchen doorway, seeing her son animated in a way she hadn't witnessed in months. The scope of Jaden's imagination was staggering. He had created not just buildings, but entire civilizations, complete with their own architectural philosophies and engineering principles. His cities weren't just fantasy. They were thoughtful explorations of how space could be organized differently, how function and beauty could merge in ways that challenged conventional thinking. "This isn't just art," Elena told Sandra quietly while Jaden was upstairs retrieving another sketchbook. "This is visionary work. Your son has a gift that most professional architects would kill for." Sandra wiped her hands on her apron, a gesture that couldn't hide her trembling fingers. "He's always been special. Different, but special. The schools don't see it. They just see the autism, the silence. They think he's not capable of much." "They're wrong," Elena said simply. "Very wrong." 2 weeks later, Time magazine hit newsstands with a cover story titled, "The Genius Among Us, Art from a Silent Voice." Jaden's cityscape dominated the cover, reproduced in full color with the kind of treatment usually reserved for major museum exhibitions. The article inside featured a full portfolio of his work, along with commentary from leading architects and urban planners who recognized the sophistication of his vision. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The magazine's website crashed from traffic. Art galleries called asking about exhibitions. Architecture firms inquired about internships. The New York Institute of Art offered a full scholarship. Netflix optioned the story for a documentary. Pixar sent a recruitment letter. At Roosevelt High, the reaction was more complicated. Students who had mocked Jayden now claimed they'd always recognized his talent. Teachers who had written him off as not college material suddenly remembered his potential. Miss Haywood, faced with media inquiries about the school's hidden genius, found herself scrambling to explain why such exceptional work had been literally thrown in the trash. Lucas Martinez discovered that internet fame could cut both ways. The TikTok video of him mocking Jayden had been screenshot and shared across social media platforms, his face and name attached to articles about bullying and racism in schools. College recruiters who had been courting him began returning his calls less frequently. His parents, mortified by the public attention, issued a formal apology and enrolled him in sensitivity training. Mrs. Haywood's contract was not renewed for the following year. The school district, under pressure from both media attention and a civil rights investigation, implemented new policies about recognizing and supporting diverse learning styles. A year later, Jayden stood in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn that served as his first solo exhibition space. The walls were covered with enlarged versions of his architectural fantasies, but also with new work. Pieces that showed how his imaginary cities might address real-world problems like climate change and social inequality. His voice was still soft, but it carried confidence as he spoke to visitors about his vision for built environments that could adapt and respond to human needs. The documentary crew from Netflix had captured his transformation from invisible teenager to celebrated artist. But more importantly, they documented how recognition could unlock potential that had always existed. Schools across the country were using his story to train teachers about neurodiversity and hidden talents. In his pocket, Jayden carried a worn piece of paper, one of the torn pages from his original sketchbook that the school custodian had saved. It reminded him of where he'd started, of the period when his voice had been silenced by people who couldn't see past their own assumptions. The exhibition's centerpiece was a glass case containing artifacts from his high school years, the defaced locker nameplate, the torn sketchbook pages, screenshots of the mocking social media posts, but also his acceptance letter to the New York Institute of Art, the Time magazine cover, letters from young artists who'd been inspired by his story. Late that evening, after the last visitor had left and the gallery lights had dimmed, Jayden stood alone among his creations. Outside the windows, the real city of New York sparkled with lights, its own architectural dreams reaching toward the sky. He pulled out his phone and recorded a brief video message for the documentary. "When they laughed at my drawings, I stopped believing in them," he said, his voice clear in the empty space. "But the drawings were always real. The only thing that changed was who was looking at them." He paused, considering his words carefully. There are probably kids right now sitting in libraries and classrooms, creating things that other people can't understand. I want them to know that being different isn't being wrong. Sometimes the world just needs time to catch up to what you're seeing. The camera captured him returning to work on a new piece, another impossible city, another vision of how the world could be reimagined. His pencil moved across the paper with the same precise confidence it had always possessed, but now the silence around him was reverent rather than dismissive. The world had learned to listen to voices that spoke without words, to see talent that didn't fit traditional expectations. In the end, the greatest transformation hadn't been Jayden's emergence from invisibility. It had been society's willingness to look beyond its own prejudices and recognize genius wherever it appeared. The boy who had been mocked for drawing in silence had taught an entire community how to see with new eyes, how to hear the profound messages that existed in the spaces between spoken words. Talent doesn't announce itself with credentials or conform to expectations about who deserves recognition. Sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages, waiting patiently for someone willing to look beyond the surface and see what's really there.